In the heart of the Njoro Kingdom, a rural village where ancient customs bound women to the will of men, lived Sia, a 25-year-old woman of immense strength and wisdom. Sia had always been different. Though quiet and reserved, she held a fierce spirit that rejected the injustices women faced. Growing up, Sia witnessed the brutality inflicted on women. Her mother, like many others, had been forced to endure female genital mutilation, FGM, and the scars she bore were not only physical. Sia's own sister, Kina, had been forced into marriage with a much older man who regularly abused her. Sexual and domestic violence were common, but no one spoke against it. Women were expected to suffer in silence, their cries muffled by the weight of tradition and fear. One evening, after hearing the agonized screams of another girl undergoing FGM, Sia decided that she could no longer stand by. She gathered a few women in secret and began discussing ways to fight back against the injustices they faced. Sia's rebellion began quietly but soon grew louder. She spoke to women about their rights, planting seeds of courage in their hearts. They began to question why they were subjected to mutilation, forced marriages, and physical abuse. Slowly, more women joined Sia's movement, and together they decided that they would end the practice of FGM in their village, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, the men in the village began to grow suspicious. The elders, bound by centuries of patriarchal power, felt their control slipping. They threatened the women, warning them of curses and punishments from their ancestors. Sia knew that fear was the weapon of the oppressors, and she continued to stand strong, inspiring more women to rise. Sia's own family was torn apart by her activism. Her father, a respected village elder, refused to speak to her, while her brothers sneered, calling her a rebel without respect for tradition. Yet, her mother secretly supported her, even though she could not openly defy her husband. As Sia's movement gained momentum, tragedy struck her family. Kina, Sia's sister, had become a symbol of the suffering endured by women in the village. She had been abused by her husband for years, and when she tried to leave him, she was beaten to death. Her death was a turning point. The village women, enraged by the violence, marched to the elders' council, demanding justice. The men, however, were unmoved. They ruled Kina's death as an unfortunate domestic matter, dismissing the cries for justice. But Kina's death lit a fire in the hearts of the women, and Sia, broken-hearted, became more determined than ever. She vowed to end the silence surrounding domestic violence, sexual abuse, and FGM, declaring that no more women would die in shame and silence. In Kina's memory, Sia called for a meeting of all the women in the region. Hundreds came, including girls as young as 12 and grandmothers in their 80s. They formed a coalition and began preparing for a bold confrontation with the village elders. The day of the confrontation arrived. Sia led the women to the village square, where the council of elders sat in judgment. This was the first time in the village's history that so many women had gathered in defiance of the men. The air crackled with tension as the women spoke of the abuses they had suffered in silence for generations: sexual abuse, FGM, domestic violence, family violence, and rape. They demanded change, not just for themselves, but for their daughters and future generations. The village elders, taken aback by the boldness of the women, attempted to dismiss them, but Sia spoke with a voice so powerful that even the elders had to listen. She described in vivid detail the suffering caused by their customs, calling for an end to the cycle of violence and oppression. She told them that the time had come for women to rise and claim their freedom. That day marked a turning point. Though many men resisted, there were some who began to see the truth in the women's words. The younger generation, in particular, started to question the validity of their traditions. Change did not come overnight, but Sia's rebellion set off a chain of events that would transform the village forever. Years later, the village of Njoro was no longer the same. FGM was banned, and laws were passed to protect women from domestic and sexual violence. Sia, now older, stood on the steps of the new council hall, which for the first time in history included women as leaders. She looked out at the village, proud of the progress they had made, but aware that the fight was not yet over. The flames of freedom she had ignited would continue to burn, passing from one generation to the next.